who are those guys who looked around more nationally and said, oh, this guy definitely would have just gone to Texas or Texas A&M, but this year he's going to Florida. This year he's going to Ohio State because he can learn about Ohio State and get around easily. Who are those guys who ventured outside of what would have been their natural footprint even 10, 15 years ago?
Well, I mean, even 10, 15 years ago, the thought of a kid leaving Florida for another school not named Alabama or Georgia was unheard of. This year, you have 2 top 10 players in Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy and Shamar Stewart leaving Florida to go to Texas A&M.
Yeah.
Now, I may have missed it, but I'm 45 years old. I still haven't seen Texas A&M win a national championship in my lifetime. Yet they're recruiting above their success rate. I wouldn't say they're recruiting above their weight class because A&M has the resources, they have the history and the tradition, but they don't have a national championship. So Texas A&M has a national championship coach in Jimbo Fisher, and because of the success he's had at A&M or the anticipated success, guys are leaving Florida to go to Texas A&M. Why? Well, part of that's because Texas A&M's in the SEC now. Would this same thing be happening if we were 12 years ago and Kevin Sumlin was the head coach, or Dennis Franchione or Mike Sherman? Would they have even bothered to recruit in the state of Florida?
Right.
No. They would have probably had 90% of their class out of the state of Texas. You know, think back to Pete Carroll in the early 2000s when he was really getting things cranking at USC. Those classes were built on Southern California kids. But there was a Mike Williams in there.
Right.
You know, then there became a Dwayne Jarrett, a Brian Cushing. But more often than not, the backbone of those classes were the California kids. Yet he could go to the East Coast and recruit a Brian Cushing. He could go to the Midwest and, you know, recruit some of the players that he got out of the central part of the country. He could go to the Southeast and bring in guys like Joe McKnight. But he was still going to recruit California. The problem was back then, nobody bothered to try to recruit California because they figured, hey, we might be Alabama or Georgia, but that's 2000s Alabama or Georgia.
Right.
We're not beating Pete Carroll for a California kid. There's no point in going out that way. He's going to get whoever he wants. And if he doesn't, then Jeff Tedford's probably going to get him. Or Mike Bellatti's probably going to get him. And then it seemed to be as the Pac-12 came into play and the Pac-10 was going away, you add Colorado and Utah, you would have thought it would have put a bigger fence around the West. But that's when those West Coast players started to leave in droves, and it really reached its fever pitch with the 2020 class when in 2019, 2020, you started to see it happening more and more. And then when you had the 3 top quarterbacks in the country who are within a 40-mile radius of each other, go to Clemson, Ohio State, and Alabama, 2 of them end up Heisman finalists, 1 wins the Heisman, that's when you knew recruiting the West was basically a free-for-all. Forget free agency or the transfer portal. The Wild West started basically sending everybody away. Now it's getting better. And Lincoln Riley at USC is already showing that with the 3 guys that he's got committed for 2023, 2 of those were LA kids or Southern California kids committed to Oklahoma that are now staying home. Dan Lanning, he's already used to recruiting nationally when he was at Georgia. He knows that Oregon's a national brand, but he still wants to emphasize West Coast recruiting. That's why he hires Demetrius Martin and Tosh Lapoy and Adrian Clem, guys that have ability to recruit nationally, but they have a better ability to recruit regionally so they can cherry pick the national guys and get the Southern California. So, you know, when you see Texas A&M going into Florida and landing 2 top 10 players, that's when you know it's not just a West Coast thing. It's a national thing at this point.
You mentioned Texas A&M about an hour or so ago. I saw on the 247Sports Instagram the official notice, the official posting that Texas A&M had locked up the #1 all-time recruiting class, which is impressive by any measure. I wonder if you could also put that into perspective for us, because I feel probably like a lot of folks out there who listen to this show, we're used to hearing similar hyperbole as it relates to Alabama and Clemson in the recruiting game. What does this A&M class look like, feel like? How is it different? What makes it better than some of the other ones we've seen before?
Well, and just for historical context, when Alabama had the highest rated class a year ago of all time, it broke an 11-year stranglehold that Florida had. And now within a year, A&M's class is that much better. But what makes it different is the defensive line. You know, as West Coast guys, Dan, we know if there's 1 or 2 elite defensive linemen in the West, that's a big year. JT Tuimoloau, Corey Foreman were unicorns when it comes to the talent at the defensive line position in the West. And that's why Pete Carroll had it going on at SCs. He was always getting the best D linemen. But when you can get the recruiting chops and the recruiting areas that Texas A&M got. So to go into Florida to get Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy and to get Shamar Stewart, to go over to Tennessee, another SEC state, to get Walter Nolan, to be able to go up to Pennsylvania to get an I. White, to go out to Arizona to get Anthony Lucas. That's 5 defensive linemen in the top 40 or 50 players, not just defensive linemen, top 40, 50 players in the country. And you've got the deep south in Florida. You've got the upper east in Pennsylvania. You've got the west in Arizona. You've got Tennessee. And we haven't even gotten into the players from their own state that they got. So what he did is that he made it apparent this conference, if you look at the Alabama and the Georgias that are competing for national championships, Clemson, when they were winning, it was with elite defensive linemen. And it was with, yes, their offenses were scoring, but they all had next level defensive linemen, whether they were edge rushers, whether they were 3-techs, whether they were noses, defensive tackles, you name it. You need to have a variety. And that's what Jimbo Fisher really started to focus on this year. It wasn't the offense. They're never going to have problems calling plays and moving the ball with Jimbo calling them. But if you aren't stopping anybody, it doesn't matter how many points you score. So he goes and he focuses on defensive linemen, and they have a generational haul with Stewart, with an I. White, with Walter Nolan, with Brownlow-Dindy, with Anthony Lucas. And if you're getting them, that also means Georgia and Alabama aren't. So that was the other thing. It wasn't just going and finding elite players. It's going and finding elite players that the schools that you keep losing them to also want, because not only do you strengthen your hold on them, but you loosen their hold on it, and that gives you a chance. Now, the expectations are going to be very crystal clear to Jimbo. You got this class. You better win a champion. I mean, how many great recruiting classes did Kirby Smart have? Yeah. And it only cooled off when he finally won the national championship this year. With the amount of money he's being paid at Texas A&M, they're expecting a national championship probably within a year from now, even if the majority of that elite D linemen are true freshmen.